Today, you are listening to Think Again Christian, where pop culture and Christian traditions collide with biblical truth. Sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, pastor of Ravensdale Bible Church and superintendent of Rainier Christian Schools, Tony Jamie.
Rethinking and re-examining concepts, ideas, traditions, beliefs in our culture and the Christian circles that we live in. One of the things that I love to do is to actually think about the movies that I'm watching, and even more particular, having 5 children, I want them to think about the movie that we just watched. It's, I'm not trying to be a killjoy, right? And I do let my kids watch movies. We do, have limits and limitations on what they can watch, but it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult choice of which movies they can watch, and certainly, you've never seen that movie, and so you have an idea, or maybe a really good friend recommended it to you, and so you say okay, and it's got a PG rating, and yet I'm actually find myself more and more, offended by the subtle messages in movies. One of my favorite movies is My Fair Lady. And, it's a musical and it's long, and you would think, oh, wow, you have a problem with My Fair Lady? Well, for me, the stumbling block with that movie, which is where most of the movie is the setting, which is in the professor's office, and his office is spectacular. His office is like bigger than most people's houses, and he's got like 3-4 stories of books. It's a library office. And for me, I lust for that. That would be just heaven on earth, right? To, lock myself in a room and hang out with, one of my buddies, and we can just read and talk. And that's not good for me. Again, not saying that, My Fair Lady is an evil movie or anything, but for me, it speaks to a craving and a desire that's not necessarily a good thing. The desire to just not be with family and friends and other people, but to be more alone and just reading books and having no outflow, rather just having inflow. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to do Think Again Christian is to be able to kind of talk about some of these movies and just kind of look at them. And one of the movies that's my favorite movie, and I'll get to that in a second, but I was thinking, what's your favorite movie, right? Do you like old classic movies or some of the new ones? You think of things like Wizard of Oz or Citizen Kane, maybe Ben-Hur or Singing in the Rain, Star Wars, Casablanca. Well, mine is It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life. And from the very first time that I watched it as a child, and I don't know, maybe the 20, 30 times I've seen it since, it's always had a huge impact on me. And it's changed, and the impact has been different from the different times that I've watched it. And so today, I just want to look at this from a very positive side, actually, to say, I want to look at 3 ways that I actually identify with George Bailey, the main character in the movie, and hopefully share with you a vision of hope, that for your life, so that you can see how wonderful of a life you have. It's a wonderful life. But I would add, in Christ Jesus. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with realizing how awesome and amazing their life is, because a lot of people don't have Jesus Christ. And for those of us who do have the Lord, it is an amazing life. It is a spectacular life. And we need to be reminded of that sometimes, because as we live, life is hard. There's tragedy in life. There's bills to pay in life. There's car accidents. There's, roofs leak, and lawns need to be mowed, and people that we love get sick and hurt and die. And so life is not easy. And sometimes it's becomes an easier thing to just focus on the tragedy or the trial. Well, first, if you have, maybe you've been living under a rock or, in a cave somewhere, and you've never seen It's a Wonderful Life, because it comes on every single year, and most people have. But I understand some people might not have seen the movie. But it's a story based on a man his name is George Bailey, who's frustrated with his life as he battles this personal contentment. Finally, he decides that his life is actually worth more dead than alive. because he's got this insurance policy, right? And so he's on a bridge and he's looking over the railing. He's getting ready to jump in the river. And just before jumping, he cries out to the Lord. And that's actually how the movie starts. And it's a very interesting, it gets me from the very beginning in the movie because it's black and it's supposed to be the stars. And as God and angels are talking and communicating, the stars kind of light up, right? It gives you that idea that, hey, the heavenlies are out there, right? And they are watching and observing what's taking place on earth. And as George Bailey's praying and thinking as though, like the Israelites in Egypt, right? They pray, but nobody's listening. Nobody hears. When the reality is God is listening and God does hear. And it's just like in Daniel when the prayers are going up and it's like, well, where are you, God? And it's like, well, we've been in battle. We've actually been in battle. And sometimes we just don't think of it that way. But as George is praying, God responds by sending him an angel in training. Of course, we don't believe in that angel in training, but it's a movie. And in order to convince George that his life is worth living, the angel shows George what the world would be like without him. And so it's kind of got that, Christmas Carol, overtone where he's going to go back and take a look at certain vignettes of his life. And so, for example, George Bailey has this amazing impact that extends not only in his own small town local community, but beyond. See, one of the events that happens is as a child, he saves his brother's life. They're playing on the pond and the pond's frozen over and his brother, skids a little too far, goes into the water and is drowning and is going to die. And George goes in and saves his brother's life. Now, the ramification of that is his brother grows up to be a great war hero. He's a fighter pilot who saves a whole ship from being destroyed because a plane is getting ready to crash into it. And so hundreds of lives are saved because of George Bailey's brother. But really, the hundreds of lives are saved because George Bailey saved his brother. And so we see the effect that George's life had. We also see in another example that, as George is a youth and he's the delivery boy, that his boss is fixing the prescriptions, but his boss is just in agony because he just found out that his son had died in war through a telegram. And so he's prescribing, he's putting in the wrong pills, right? The wrong drugs to give to somebody. And George happens to notice it and just doesn't seem right to him. So he runs to his dad, tries to get his dad's advice, but his dad's too busy at the time. So then he returns back to the pharmacy, and by that time, calls have come in. Where's the pills? People are sick, and the clerk is just outraged at George because he didn't deliver the pills on time. But George knew something was wrong, and he brings it to his attention. He discovers that actually the pharmacist had prescribed something that would have been poisonous and very dangerous. And so he saves somebody's life again. And even more importantly, we find through this movie the ramifications were Mr. Gower was going to go to prison for this event and then become the town drunk. And so he also saves Mr. Gower's life. We see again in another example that the whole town of Bedford Falls, as George goes back to it and is walking through the town, the entire landscape that looked like, a nice little town from something that you would see in an old black and white TV show, where Opie grew up, Newberry, right? And instead of that town, now we see a little mini Vegas. And it's full of corruption and gambling and people that he knew that were nice people are now not so nice. And because George's involvement with the local town during the Depression, he ends up saving the town from a complete change. And that's because of one man, the villain of the movie, Mr. Potter, who's the rich and wealthy man. And George actually has an interaction with him in which, Mr. Potter finds George's money that he's getting ready to put into the bank, and he keeps it for himself. Even though he knows that George has lost the money. Even though he knows it's George's money, Mr. Potter keeps that. And that's really what kind of gets the whole movie going, because it's in that desperation where George realizes, I'm going to go to prison. And so it'd be better if I were dead than go to prison. And so we see this setting for It's a Wonderful Life. And the setting revolves then again around George Bailey, who really is miserable. He's miserable. And as you're watching the movie, and especially as it gets started, I mean, you think the guy's got a pretty darn good life, right? And yet for him, internally, he's in an internal struggle. And we know a lot of people like that, don't we? We know people like that very close to us. We look at them every day in the mirror. And one of the main reasons why I want to talk about this is because I want you to understand. I want you to understand it's a wonderful life. Your life is a wonderful life. Your life has a plan and has a purpose. And that's because you're a child of God. And that's because God uniquely and individually made you. And you know what the great thing about that is? You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to do somebody else's job. You don't have to do somebody else's ministry. You don't have to look like somebody else, talk like somebody else, live in their house, live in their town. One of the most beautiful concepts in the Bible is this concept of we are the body of Christ. And so we talk about this all the time. Some are the ear, some are the eyes, some are the nose. What's more important? Well, none of them are more important. And so you be who you're called to be. And It's a Wonderful Life, that's one of the things that we see in that. And so there were three pretty clear reasons why I identified with George. One was, I really have come to identify with George's failure. There's definitely aspects of George's life where, he just feels like a failure. He's not rich and famous, and he had financial struggles, and he was doing the job that he didn't really want to do, but he kind of fell into the family business. The other way I identify with George is in his trials. He had in his childhood and saving his brother, he lost his hearing, and so it was kind of hard. And, I had a sports injury as well, and he felt like he was, being cheated professionally by Mr. Potter. And then I also identify with him because I so desperately really wanted to be the hero that George Bailey, by the end of the movie, is. By that point of the movie, who doesn't want to be George Bailey? Everybody wants to be George Bailey by the end of the movie. And who wouldn't want to be married to Donna Reed, right? And so when we get back, we will look more at It's a Wonderful Life and how we identify with George Bailey.
Since their small beginnings in 1963, the Ministry of Rainier Christian Schools has been dedicated to educating and developing each of their students for the glory of God. And it's more than just a school. Rainier Christian Schools is actually an entire school district, with 3 schools serving the areas of Kent, Auburn, Covington, Renton, and Maple Valley. The Christ-centered environment weaves God's truth through everything they do, from top-notch academics all the way through their competitive sports programs. Learn more at rainiercsd.org or call 425-255-7273. That's 425-255-7273. Contact Rainier Christian Schools today.
Welcome back. You're listening to Think Again Christian, sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, Tony Jamie.
It's a Wonderful Life, my favorite movie of all time. And today we're talking about how it is a wonderful life. And it's a wonderful life because we, as believers, have a new life in Christ Jesus. I was just talking about how 3 reasons how I identify with George Bailey in this movie. One was George as a failure. 2, identified with George in his trials. And 3, identify with George as a hero. And, this idea of a failure, I think a lot of us have that feeling. Well, just think for a moment, if most of us are not wealthy, rich, and famous, then, that puts 97% of us as some kind of failure, right? Of course, most of us don't think in terms of the global economy, which puts any American in the top 10% of the world's economy, which means we're actually all wealthy and rich. Probably haven't really thought of it that way. But, I've come to identify with George in a lot of ways, as the failure. I've had businesses that didn't go the way I wanted them to go. I had partnerships that turned on me, and we lost a lot of money because of those partnerships. Have other businesses that seem to have had an amazing model and yet just couldn't get off the ground. I was in marketing and advertising for 15 years when really I wanted to be full-time in Christian ministry. And that whole time I was in actual agony, feeling as though I was letting my God down, feeling as though when I stood before the throne of God that he would look at me and almost turn his head because I wasn't doing what I was called to do. Now, again, I'm not speaking to you necessarily. The Lord needs ditch diggers too, right? And policemen and people in the community. But for me, I knew that the Lord was calling me into full-time ministry. From day one when I read the scriptures, it screamed out to me, now go teach somebody else. And so I felt like a failure. I also have identified through those trials with George and because I just felt so unsatisfied, so unfulfilled, so discontent. And then deep down, desperately, I just knew that there was something else that I was made for and something that was bigger and better and more important than just, selling advertising or, building a business for money. And so, I had a great desire, like George Bailey. The family business was actually getting people home loans so that they could afford to buy their own home. This was in a time before there was, all kinds of mortgage companies and, different methods of borrowing where you only had one way. And is that if you didn't have a bunch of cash, you weren't ever going to own a home. And so the Bailey Building and Loan would actually, in essence, give people an opportunity to just buy into their own home with very, very little down. And I thought, man, I would love to be in that business. I would love to help poor people to be able to raise their children in their own community, in their own town. And a lot of that was fulfilled in me when I was working with Seattle's Union Gospel Mission, and we were able to help, feed, clothe, and shelter people throughout the Seattle area. And I love that aspect of it. I also wanted to be a hero in going beyond George Bailey. I want to spread the gospel. I mean, food, clothing, and shelter is one thing, but without the gospel, it's incomplete. And so, the Lord had put upon me to be a preacher and just have that opportunity to preach the gospel to those who've never heard or those whose hearts are hardened. And I've been able to do that. And that's just been the thrill and the highlight of my life. And then finally, I want to, who doesn't want, the Donna Reed doe eyes looking up at you as the wife, just being so proud of their husband. Every husband, whether they know it or not, that's what they want. That's what they want. And so women, ladies out there, go home and tell your husband that they're your hero, that they're your champion. They're dying to hear that. And husbands, you find a way to tell your wives how important and how awesome and how you do it all for them. And so It's a Wonderful Life has just taken on a lot of personal application for me. And what I want to get across today too, as we just, we're here for a reason, right? We're here to rethink how we think about our life, how we think about, the way life is going, and using this movie, It's a Wonderful Life, to do that. And so I want to talk a little bit about the idea of discontentment. See, at the heart of George's frustration was the feeling of coveting what others had and being discontent about his situation. So let's think again about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, right? The pillars of the faith. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. That's how we memorized it, right? Well, think again. What does the passage actually say? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, or thy neighbor's servant, or thy neighbor's donkey / Volvo, or anything. The proper way to memorize that verse is thou shalt not covet anything. Well, how we've missed the boat on that one. I mean, how often do we just look across the street and fall into all sorts of problems? We see the other guy's house, the other guy's car, the other guy's riding lawnmower, right? His 3.5 kids, and we just become very discontent. Even though he's probably looking across at you with the binoculars thinking the same thing about you, ironically. In Philippians 4, Paul encourages us, or tries to anyway, in that he says, I've learned the secret. I've learned the secret of contentment, whether with a little or with a lot, to be content. And so think about what occupies your time. Do you really spend a lot of time, I mean, be honest now, coveting what others have or serving others? Are you one that tends to be grateful and thankful about what you have, or one that tends to be just discontent and always wishes there was something better? Think about your life, your church, your impact, your purpose, your family. Ironically, driving over here, a friend of mine had called me, and he was just feeling very, very frustrated about where he's at, and he went to visit a friend at work, and he's just it was at Amazon, and as he was there, he saw something that made him even more discontent, and what he saw was a group of people that he thought to himself, I should be teaching the gospel to them. And I have a way to do that, and I know how to do that, and I have a ministry, and I'm not doing that, and he's very discontent about that. And I was trying to encourage him that, you know what, it's exciting for me to hear that he actually has purpose, he has a plan, he has goals. And I told him, you just need to do it. And he said, well, me and a couple of friends, we're actually in prayer about this. And I said, no, I just answered your prayer. Go do it. You've presented the plan to me. There's a need. Here's a plan. You're the answer. And so sometimes we just, we're held back because of our coveting and discontentment issues, because we just think other people do it better. No, the Lord made you. The Lord made you special and unique. And don't get into the numbers game, okay? The numbers game, that's a bad pattern. I've been so uniquely blessed by the Lord to put me at Ravensdale Bible Church, where it's a very, very small church, and my heart has been transformed by the people of my church. They've been a blessing to me. They're teaching me in their life, and I couldn't imagine being at a bigger church. It's not, and it would not have been a better church. At Rainier Christian Schools, I'm surrounded by people who actually they get this concept of having purpose and a plan, and that purpose is found in Christian education. And so I'm surrounded by these heroes. I mean, our staff of teachers, they dedicate their lives to preaching and teaching Jesus Christ to students every single day through Christian education. And yet, for most of them, they don't think of themselves as doing anything really spectacular or special. And yet they are. They're the greatest missionaries or ambassadors for Christ that I know. I can't think of better ambassadors for Christ. I mean, just imagine if you were called to go to the mission field in Uganda. It might take you 3, 4, 5 years to learn the language before you were actually effective. And yet my teachers, day one, are on the campus preaching and teaching Christ. Now, there's no fame. There's no great rewards. It's low pay. There's no future security. And many don't even get to see the fruit of their labor in their classrooms. And yet they're willing to make the sacrifice to be that positive George Bailey, that positive influence. And hopefully someday when we're in heaven, we get to replay it all and we get to actually see the ramifications. And if I could pray a special prayer of blessing, I would pray that all my teachers get to see that in their world and see all those children that they planted seeds and they made an impact. But better than George Bailey, because George Bailey did not have any spiritual significance, is a spiritual impact that you can have just in raising your own children, just in having an amazing marriage that is an example to others, just by being the best Christian boss and setting a new tone for what that standard is. And I would strongly encourage that some of you even consider a career in Christian education or serving a Christian school or financially blessing a Christian school so Christian schools can carry that baton. See, the last time I watched It's a Wonderful Life,